All right. So, welcome to the second of our webinar series covering law school admissions. And today I really want to cover a very, very important topic, probably the most important topic, which is the personal statements, diversity statements, why school essay, and all that good stuff. So, I've been doing this for quite a while. And so, what I want to do is really show you how to develop your application essays to really be able to stand out and get your best foot forward into law school admissions. By way of background, I started Right Track in 2008 on the back of having gone through law school, completed the bar exam, practiced, and then started the company because I realized how difficult it was for certain people to get into the program, especially those with not so good LSAT scores like me. I took the exam in December, canceled it, took it again in June, got the score. It was extremely mediocre. Then really focused from June, July, all the way through to October, November on my applications and submitted them to 17 law schools. And then I retook the LSAT in December, got my score in January, where I found out I did worse than I did in June, which kind of hurt my chances with some of the schools because they waited until I got my score in February, mid-February, end of February, to deny me. And so in the end of the day, I was admitted to UC Berkeley for law school. Took the I took the California bar. Yes, I practiced, but I also, when I was in law school, I was on law review. I did a lot of things in law school that I'm really, really proud about. It was an incredible experience. I used the same experiences and knowledge that I learned having gone through the process myself during Right Track to go to Cambridge and to do my second master's at Harvard 10 years after I graduated from law school, or maybe less, about almost 10 years. I practiced corporate law. I practiced international development law with the U.S. government, and I practice as an entrepreneur, wearing a hat where I do strategy, operations, and legal compliance and regulatory work. All right. So that's a little bit about my background. A lot of the information we're going to be covering today will be coming from the Law School Admissions Mastery course, which is really underscored by this mastery guide right here. Where we cover almost everything you can feasibly imagine from in the law school process, which we covered in the last webinar, from figuring out if law school is right for you, which is the right law school for you, figure out how to get your letters of recommendation, putting together your resume, test prep, financial aid, and then today, where we're going to be covering the bulk of all the written components of the application, namely the personal statement, why school essay, diversity statement, and so forth. All right, and you will have a link. I believe my colleague will put this in the notes, but we'll have a link for you there so that you can check out that mastery course, because I really do believe that this is going to give you an incredible foundation to get you to where you need to be. All right. So preparing your profile. In reality, in terms of your profile, and you can kind of read it there, in terms of what are the main qualifications, what are the main things that the law schools look for candidates. So just kind of take a look at that. All right. So you can see there, collaborative. They're looking for people who have strong teamwork and leadership skills, especially because that accentuates a certain key quality that they all look for, which is EQ. So again, law schools will want to see someone who's well-rounded with strong IQ, EQ, and AQ, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But they want somebody who's collaborative, strong EQ, team working skills, leadership skills, someone who's capable, strong research skills, communication skills, analytical skills, those key core qualities of what makes for a good candidate, right? Capable, like smart. That's the IQ component. Compassionate, we talked about the EQ again, but someone who has strong volunteering skills, or not volunteering skills, but volunteering experience, someone who has good community service experience, because again, that shows empathy. And the law field is all about how can we as aspiring budding lawyers do better for our society. All right. So the next one is creativity. And that really is where we play into the concept of AQ, right? Um, and that is critical thinking and multidimensional perspectives, a way of solving the problem multidimensionally. And that is important because that is really how you can hedge to be future ready. Um, so the idea here is that the concept is that AI is going to upend the legal industry. We talked about this in the first webinar. The way that you can overcome that is making yourself relevant through strong EQ and AQ, adaptability content, emotional content, the ability to relate to people, to earn their trust, to earn their confidence, and to think about problems, a massive legal problem, dissect it and bring it down so that it is more focused on small bite sizes so that you can break it down and then reconstruct it, right? That really is the AQ component and what law schools again look for. Committed, they want to make sure that you, once you go to law school, that you're going to be committed to the process and not someone who's going to bail out halfway or someone who's just going to kind of, not really take law school seriously. And then someone who's conscientious. And that is important because integrity and ethics is extremely important in the legal field. In fact, a lot of law schools will ask you to fill out a moral assessment, like kind of like a questionnaire. And it's not for a law school, it's for the bar exam. They check your moral turpitude. And so being conscientious, having a high level of integrity and ethics is extremely important to how you carry yourself and how you will be as a lawyer. Okay, so those are some very, very key core components. And why did I put that here? Because these core components will help you think through when you're writing your application materials, whether it's your resume or your addendum, your diversity statement, your Y school essay, your personal statement, all have to have components of this embedded in it so that the schools know that you are the right candidate for that school. All right. Given that background, what I want to now show you, say, okay, now that we know what the schools are looking for, how do we kind of piece it all together? This is something that I created in the Law School Admissions Mastery guide and course, which is kind of like a 5-part process of exactly how to think through putting together your application material, your essay material. So let's break it down one by one. Story creating, that's where we really surface your ideas, your values, the things that really make you stand out, make you who you are on a personal level, things that are unique to you. And to do that as part of your values, some of it is inculcated in you and as you grow up in terms of nurturing. Some of it is in terms of life experiences and life happenings that you've had in your life that are just very important, that help you figure out who you are and what you want to kind of do with your life. Storyboarding, saying, okay, now that we've had these values and these experiences, right? Now let's start documenting them all out in terms of what value corresponds to what experience really kind of showcases that value. What life happening did you have? What experience did you have? How did that kind of feed into your values, right? So that's really the storyboarding process, is just throwing all the ideas down there, one after another, so that you have a place where you have kind of like a complete universe of everything you've done. Then once you figure that out and you start piecing it together, you start figuring out that theme that really makes it stand out. And then you test that theme to see if it really has efficacy, if it has legs, right? So you say, okay, I think I'm going to really write about this experience because it surfaces as value. And the underarching theme is I want to do X, Y, and Z. And there's a theme there that kind of transcends all the essays. And you test that out to make sure that that theme will resonate, will land, because there's no point of running with a theme. You finally came up with it and it's not unique, or it's not relevant, or it's not personal enough, right? And we'll talk about those story testing mechanisms. Once you've figured out that theme, now you start piecing together the story, because you have the theme, you have the idea, you have the experiences, you have the values, you have all of that in pieces. Now we got to piece it all together into one cohesive whole. And that is going to be the story structuring process, where you want to build it into a beautiful story arc, into a beautiful story that really will captivate the audience and pull everything that you've already discussed into one location, namely your application materials, that really allow you to kind of stand out as a candidate. Finally, We've got story success. So after you've structured and put everything together, we piece together the story success, which is now that you've got all your essays, everything is complete. Let's run a check to make sure that we didn't forget anything. Are there any divisive topics? Are there any redundancies? Is it relevant? Does it have a good hook? Does it start and end well? And all those kind of things. We have a checklist for you. So that is really the art of the story crafting process that we've kind of designed for you to have a complete picture of everything from soup to nuts in terms of your application essay materials. All right, now we want to start with story creating. Here are some key values, but what I really want to show you is this line here. It says, you are living your story today that you will write about tomorrow. You are living your story today that you will write about tomorrow. Such an important concept, because what you're saying is the life happenings you have today, you had yesterday, you may have tomorrow, you'll write about in a year or two or three when you put together your application. Obviously, if you're submitting your application in a month, it's going to be a little more difficult. So the idea here is that you want to create those life happenings in the moment because you're going to write about them later. And that concept makes you much more proactive in the way you lead your life, especially if it's to end up going to a top graduate program like law school and so forth. Okay. Now, these are the values that you have plus the life happenings that we spoke about right here, right? These are the values, and then there's life happenings. So these are the values I wanted to kind of mention. Again, maybe activism, authenticity, empowerment, sustainability, spirituality, perseverance. These are maybe things for you that really stand out, that really shape who you are as an individual, that make you really unique in your own right, right? And then those values will be substantiated by those life happenings, because you want to live an authentic life, which means my value carries how I shapes how I conduct myself, informs how I conduct myself, right? Because that is true authenticity. If you act in a way that's counter to your values, then that's living inauthentically. And these schools want to see authenticity, people that live by the values that they have, right? So these are just some of the values that some people have brought up in the past, things that are very important and meaningful to them. Now, seeking life happenings, right? So we've got the values, now we've got the life happenings. You want to be proactive. Don't wait for life to happen. Make life experiences, right? Playing video games at home is probably not going to move the needle, but doing a trip, volunteering somewhere, working somewhere, facing a tough relationship. These are being proactive. These are life experiences that you're having, right? Challenges. Stand by your core beliefs. But be open-minded. If there's something that you really want to discuss with someone that's very core and important to you, well, challenge it, and then think about it, because you may want to write about that time you challenged your grandfather about his mode of thinking, or that friend, or that professor, right? And what came out of that. Take risks, right? Set accomplished goals. Be vulnerable. It's so important that you're vulnerable in life, academically, personally, socially. Obviously, protecting yourself in some ways, but also being vulnerable so that you can learn from other people's experiences. Scholarship, read, audibles, podcasts, stay informed, be a critical thinker. These are kind of life happenings, because through that podcast, maybe you'll realize something you didn't know. You go research it and become something very important to you. Be creative. We spoke about that as one of the key qualities, certain hobbies, certain things, thinking about it. Because if you have a creative outlet and then you think about it, left brain, right brain, so to speak, then you can start shaping and attacking problems from a multitude of different perspectives, which may not necessarily be, if someone has a certain way of thinking creatively and they have a problem, that they may have a way of solving it far better than someone else. So again, being creative is very important. Leadership and teamwork, we talked about that as one of the core issues. I think being collaborative, mentorship, finding someone that gives you guidance. I think that's very important. That also is a life happening, and it's in and of itself. You have someone who's extremely important to you that gives you a lot of good advice, solid advice. That could actually send you down a rabbit hole that can change your whole life experience, right? And socialize, develop those deep bonds with friends, classmates, teachers, coaches. Those people will also help you shape your life and think through things in ways you may not have thought of, that allow you to think broadly, that may send you down another rabbit hole, may open your eyes to an injustice, to something that's very important to you, that starts to kind of coalesce with your values, shape your values even, because your values are not set in stone from the time you're born, but they may start shaping your values and you start acting upon it. That really gives it the authenticity and kind of showcases if law school is the direction you want to go and for what reason. All right. Now that we basically completed the story crafting process and thought through that, now let's start storyboarding it, right? So here, again, the way that I kind of tell my clients to storyboard, which makes their lives easy, is to say, listen, just take 10 things, just start with 10 and throw it on a piece of paper. I don't care how it's written, in what shape or form, just write it down about all those life happenings, those experiences, right? We talk about them there. Personal challenges, life experiences. Start asking yourself, what are my strengths? What are my talents? What are my skills, right? Think about that, what you've developed, write it down. Ask yourself, what are my passions, my interests, my hobbies, my superpowers, right? I think that's very important because that also kind of highlights your sense of passion and your uniqueness in terms of what shapes you. Ask yourself, what are my perspectives, my diverse viewpoints, my cultural exposure, my personal experiences? All these are things that will allow you to just dump ideas onto paper that will help you shape what you want to do and who you are and why you want to go to law school, right? And here's another thing I want to kind of mention is now that you're kind of storyboarding and putting all these stuff down, also start thinking about developing lists and fleshing out your resume because you're going to have to submit it anyway. So start putting down all your extracurriculars, your summer activities, your volunteer activities, your professional experience, academics, life experience, all these things, put it down on paper, right? They will inform your resume and they'll also inform your application materials. Now, I put this in here, maximize, mitigate, manage, and minimize, because I think it's an important way also as you go through the storyboarding process to kind of assess kind of where you are and where you can focus your application in terms of the storyboarding process. Because maybe you've got a certain strength that you want to maximize. So in the storyboarding process, you piece that in there. Maybe you have some weaknesses that you discover through the storyboarding process. Well, you want to mitigate that weakness, which is the addendum. Maybe you have opportunities that you start developing by storyboarding. You're like, actually, this is something that really makes me shine. It's an opportunity I can seize. Well, then you figure out how you can do that. That may not be in the written material, but it's something that you want to be considering. And then potential threats that are happening, whether it's financial or life experiences, whatever it is, that also you want to minimize. So I say maximize your strengths, mitigate your weaknesses, manage your opportunities, and minimize your threats. To think through your application, your profile, and how you're going to put together your essay materials. Because definitely from the maximizing and mitigating, you can do that through your essay materials. All right. Now that you've come up with all these great ideas and you start to weave and thread together a story, now let's test out and make sure that that theme is the right theme, right? Is by story testing. So we do that through a couple of tests. Does that theme engage emotionally? I think that's such an important one. That's the authenticity test. It's an emotional thing. And so if it doesn't move you to tears, it doesn't give you goosebumps, doesn't say aha, then you're probably on the wrong. It's probably not strong enough, especially for a personal statement. Maybe less so. An addendum doesn't matter as much, but a personal statement really needs to be emotional, needs to stand out. It needs to be personal, right? Relevant, right? I call it the Vega test, which is values that you have shape the experiences the values that are your core values shape your experiences, right? Because they inform it. The experiences start to shape your goals in life, right? And those goals require an action, right? Okay, so you got values that shape experiences that start shaping your life goals, and life goals that require action. And that is the Vega test. So you want to ask yourself, is what the theme I'm talking about relevant to this concept, this values, experiences, goals, action, values, experiences, goals, action? Is it relevant to that? If it's not relevant to it, it's just a random thought, a random theme that has nothing to do with the core values of who you are and why you want to go to law school, then it's probably not the right theme. Okay. Holistic. Does that theme intersect with the same theme across all your applications? It's a totality test, right? Holistic test. Does it all kind of come together beautifully? Or is this random theme out here and a random theme out here, and it doesn't cover everything collectively? Okay. And then finally, is it unique to you and the program, right? Is it personal? So you want to ask yourself, is the theme I'm talking about and the way I've written this essay, can I delete the word law and fill in the word policy and it works? Then maybe it's not the right theme, right? Uh, can I delete my name and put somebody else's name and will it work? If it does still, it's not the right story. It's not the right theme. It has to be personal to you. So it has to be emotionally engaging, relevant, holistic to the application, and personal to you. All right. Those are the story testing mechanisms that we talk about. All right. Now that you've figured the theme out and everything, you have a good idea of how it's all going to come together. Now, how do we? Now you're going to be like, okay, I got it all, but how do I put pen to paper? Well, let's think about the story structuring process, right? And ask yourself, why you? Why now? Why us? Right? That's the thing, the underlying thing. You've got the theme, but I want to make sure that you've answered that within the whole concept, within all your essay materials. Okay. And to do that, we created something, not we created, that's a lie, this concept of a story narrative that's been around forever and a day. But I kind of fitted it with these kind of milestones here, or these markers that help you think through it in a holistic. In fact, each one of these essentially is a section in your personal statement, almost a paragraph, each one of these, right? So on this axis, you've got tension. On this axis, you've got beginning, middle, and end. So let's start it off. You always want to start a story kind of like a movie. That's why I have the movie camera here, with an attention grabber. What is the opening scene? How does the story progress? What is the climax? How does it end, right? So what is the opening scene, right? What's the attention grabber, the inciting incident? How do you pull them in? What do those look like? Quotes, statistics, action sequences, right? A dialogue. These are all ways of starting your essay, like a profound epiphany, right? So that is a attention grabber. Then you go to B, background. That's your character development. That's really where you kind of go into and start talking about you, your values, your upbringing, who you are. All right, super core, because you want the audience, the admissions community, to fall in love with you. And the only way they'll fall in love with you is if they know more about you, right? Think about it. If you're watching a movie and there's a guy and he starts walking down the street and he is clearly your protagonist, and then goes into a coffee shop and has a coffee and then engages with the waitress and says like two pieces of dialogue, and suddenly somebody shoots him in the head and he's done. Well, you're like, huh? I thought this guy was the protagonist. No, they may be the protagonist, but because you didn't even learn more about them and get to love them, except for them walking into a cafe, having a coffee, and having a very small piece of dialogue with the waitress, you don't learn a lot about them. So you don't kind of care if they get killed. Same thing here. Not that we want you to die, but the same thing here is that you want the audience, the admissions committee, to fall in love with you. So they need to know more about you. Now, if you have the action sequence, the same one I just told you, where the person's walking down the street, they're on their phone, they're texting, they're talking to the mother, saying to their mother, I love you, or something like that. Please take care of grandmother. She means so much to me, whatever it is, right? The idea here is that you want to make sure, sorry, then from there, they walk into the cafe, they fall in love with the waitress over the course of the first 5 to 10 minutes. And then they're talking about setting up a date or whatever it is. It's just something beautiful. And you start learning about the guy's background as he talks to the waitress and all this thing. And then suddenly gets shot in the head. You're gutted. You're shocked because you fell in love with that character and now they're gone. Okay. So same thing here. Background. I want them to learn everything about you so that they can fall in love with you faster. Then, based on background, you start developing your story development, right? Or what we say C, career. And here I mean career as an academic career, extracurricular career, so to speak, professional career if you've developed on internships and so forth. But this is the career aspect of it. So you grab their attention, they learn more about you, right? So that's the why you. And then here they're going to say, given who I am, okay, given who I am, here is what I've done about it, right? Values into experiences. Remember Vega, values into experiences, right? So right here, background, the values, C, the experiences that you've had. This is where you flex everything about yourself, especially about why law school, keep it relevant. Then D, direction. Remember Vega, values, experiences, goals, right? So D, direction, this is where you're saying, here are my goals. It's an inflection point. Then you're going to be like, why is Yoda there? Because Yoda is going to help you with that inflection point, because they're going to get you from and Yoda, again, because Yoda in the movie Star Wars is helping Luke Skywalker decide if he wants to stay as Luke Skywalker or become a Jedi Knight, right? And so in this case, you have to make that decision. I want to be Luke Skywalker. I want to be a Jedi. Luke Skywalker, Jedi. Luke walks. So in the end of the day, what you've decided is I want to be a Jedi, which means I want to go to law school. And to get into law school based on all these experiences, because here you're saying I've been doing X, Y, and Z, but I've realized that there's a deficiency. I realize that there's something more I want to do in the future, and I can't get to it unless dum da da dum educational program and institution. In comes Yoda, who's going to train you or train the Luke Skywalker to be a Jedi. In this case, the law school, who is going to be Yoda in this case, is going to train you to become a lawyer. Okay, so that's the sequence, and so that's the paragraph. Educational program institution is where you start talking about law school, and particularly why that law school. Okay, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later as well. Okay, so again, you talk about yourself, talk about your career, your background, the flex of what you've done, and kind of shape what you've been doing and why law school is kind of the direction you're going to start going to, kind of alluding to it here. And then here you smack them with it. And you're going to basically say, given everything I've done, I realize that the only way I can really get to where I want to go is through law, because I want to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And to do that, I need to go to a top law school, and your law school is the ideal educational setting to be able to pursue my legal studies. In comes the penultimate paragraph, which then talks about that school, the why school. If it doesn't ask you for a why school specific essay, this is where you would put it in. If it does, then you don't have to have that section. You just go from D straight to F. And again, let's use the Vega example, the Vega concept. Here's your values, here's your experiences, here's your goals, and here's the action you're going to take, which is to go to law school, right? So it's all right there, and that's why it's relevant. Finally, F finale. This seeks to bring closure to this action sequence. If it's a statistic, you bring closure to it. If it was a dialogue, you close it. If it was an action sequence, you bring it to resolution, right? And that's where we have the time period here, beginning, middle, and end, with the rising and the decreasing tension of the essay. Okay, I did put this here because, again, it's the hook, the theme. How does it all kind of come together? What is the takeaway you want from this essay? The thing that really is memorable for the admissions committee. All right, this to me has worked. It's timeless. It's worked thousands of times with clients, not just applying to law school, applying to graduate schools, applying to even colleges. It works really well when they ask you about a personal statement versus if they ask you a specific essay that says, give me an example of where you failed. Then this may not work as perfectly because it's kind of made for personal statements and for something slightly longer than a 250 word or 350 word essay. But it still can give you a good idea of how to think through and flesh through a story structuring process. All right. So, well, I've pretty much covered all of this. I didn't realize I had this in here, but here you guys go. Attention grabber, and this is the word count, target length, background, target length, right? So you can kind of see this is going to be maybe like 12, 15% of your essay. This is going to be about 15, 17% of your essay. This is going to be a little bit more of the bulk of it. And this basically says, how do you draw on the audience? Who am I? How am I living by who I am, right? What are my goals for the future? Why does that degree, or why do I want that degree and your school to achieve that goal? Again, that's about 100, 125 words. And then finally, what is the final takeaway message do you want to end with, right? And that probably is going to be the shortest paragraph of all, which is just kind of the finale, bringing it to it. And some people may run out of space in their personal statements because there's only 2 pages, and they may just punt on this as well. All right. Looks like we got some questions. To what extent would you say a well-written essay can outweigh a below medium GPA? I mean, I had a below medium LSAT score, and definitely my essays helped. What I would say, Anna, is your addendum is going to be even more important because you're going to be able to explain that and then draw their attention away from just the standardized score, but also draw them over to who you are, which is really going to come out in your personal statement and so forth. What can you control today if you already graduated from school and you've already taken the LSAT? What can you control? The only things you can control are the essays you write and the recommendations you probably seek. That's it. Other than that, the other two, the die is cast. Okay. And then the second question is, what is more important, a cohesive application where the stuff in your resume also points to the purpose in your personal statement, or a personal statement that stands out and seems unique? Great question, Anna. And that's really where I don't want you to kind of, and that's going to be actually in the don'ts section of this, in the story testing, because if you not the story testing, excuse me, the story checklist, the story success, because if you feel like all you've done is pretty much taken your resume and put it into prose and just farmed out all that information there and didn't really add the relevance and really add the personal, didn't add the emotional connection, then yes, it's going to be a disaster from that perspective. So in this case, what you want to do is you want to make sure that you're not just regurgitating your resume material, but you're coming up with things that each and every one complement each other. Like we talked about the holistic totality test. You want each one to complement each other, but provide different aspects of your background as best as possible. Kind of like as if you have a bunch of stars and they're not overlapping, but they're kind of intersecting and they're building to become a longer chain of stars that are all intersecting together that form a beautiful picture of who you are. All right. So anyway, this is a breakdown of the ABCs of the personal statement. We kind of already went through it in depth. So now let's jump over to the diversity statement. Now, this is contentious because obviously with the watering down of DEI and DEI being slowly taken away from applications, I don't think it's going to be completely gone, because I think what we need to do is we have to rethink what is diversity. Diversity is not just the color of your skin or the religion that you're part of, or even your sexual orientation. It's all those, and how it's impacted you, and how it's helped you lead your life to be a better person, and how it's made you more caring of others and tolerant of others. That's what they want to see, right? They don't want to just have you talk about, cry me a river. This is who I am. This is what I was born with, and that's it. Like they want to say, okay, I get it, but what have you done about it? How have you served other people who are similarly situated? That is going to show the strength, the core of who you are, for more than just what color is your skin, and again, maybe what medical tribulation you've kind of suffered from, but taking to that next level. So the question really is, when you ask yourself this, if we know that the personal statement is, why do you want to go to law school? Why you, why now, why us, right? Answering that, like why you, why now? Why you want to go to law school? Why do you want to go to law school now? And why do you want to go to our law school? If that's the questions you answer and for the law school application, this one is asking you to answer the question of, how are you going to add to the class community? That's it. Bottom line. And regardless of what happens to DEI, regardless of what happens to diversity and what people's opinions are of it, it doesn't matter, because how you add to the class is always going to be an important factor. How you're going to show up to the class is always going to be an important factor. They don't need a bunch of robots who are extremely smart, but with no empathy, with no life experiences. They will not take 100, like a class of 1,000. They won't take 1,000, A++ undergrads. They just won't. They want some people with some experience. They want some people with long-term experience. They want people with mediocre grades but great LSATs. They want a diversity of people, and they want people of different narratives and life experiences, okay? What is diversity? I've given you some examples of it: sexual diversity, sexual orientation, socioeconomic hardships, volunteer experiences, medical tribulation, caring for others, unique skills and hobbies, activism, professional endeavor. If you're an entrepreneur, that is diversity in a way, because you've been able to achieve a certain thing, right? So if your personal statement's not talking about that, it's talking about something completely different, then maybe you talk about the entrepreneurial experience and what you've done with it, how it's served a greater community and greater cause. Obviously, if it's just about money making, maybe it's not the best thing to put in a diversity statement. But just again, thinking about that compassion aspect, that EQ. And then neurodiversity, which is a newer, more recent way of describing people's afflictions, so to speak, and fact, certain skills that they have, having neurodiversity, whether it's ADHD, whether it's different levels of autism, and so forth. All right. How do you structure the statement? Slightly different from the personal statement, where we said attention grabber, background, career, direction, school, or like educational institution, and then finale. Here, you're going to you start with the same two: attention grabber, something pulls them in. Talk about the background of the experience, right? Then talk about the circumstance itself that makes it really stand out. So a little bit of a background, then mostly the circumstance, right? So maybe talks about, you pull them in, talk a little bit about your background from that diverse perspective, then talk about a specific circumstance that really kind of accentuates that diversity that you have. then debrief it, talking about, what that meant to you, how that shaped you, and so forth. Then E for engagement, right? What do you want to do about that now, given all these experiences and so on and so forth? This is really what I want to do when I'm in your school to really kind of give back to how I'm going to add to the class community, given my experiences. And then F for future, bringing it to the next level and saying, and given all that I've done, here's what I want to do in the future as well in terms of diversity, in terms of who you are. All right. Again, the goal is to reinforce the applicant's contribution to diversity and commitment to promoting DI. I use the word DI here, unapologetically, because I do believe it's important. I think some people are getting rid of the concept of equity. I think they're calling it diversity, opportunity, and inclusion, or something to that effect. I mean, they're changing that equity because what they don't want is people who are, let's say hypothetically, have much better LSAT scores, much better, GPAs, but they take someone who's far less qualified simply because they had a unique life experience. That's where the equity fits in. And I think that's what really has irked a lot of people and caused the lawsuits that we've seen. So that's what they're talking about, opportunity, given opportunities to different people, while hopefully still maintaining the merit that's required, or at least factoring that in to the overall decision-making process. If there is no diversity statement for your particular school, I would still write one, because chances are there's going to be some law schools that are going to ask for it. So do write it. It's still very, very important because, again, it answers this fundamental question, which doesn't necessarily come out in the personal statement. It really is a unique standalone. All right. Now, I put this here because I did talk about this last time, but I want to kind of reiterate it again, which is the addendum, another very important written component of your application materials, which is explaining kind of what we talked about, member strengths, weakness, opportunities, threats from that SWOT analysis. This kind of explains and mitigates that weakness. So whether it's a weakness of a low LSAT, kind of like Anna said, what happens by below a poor GPA? Do the essays help? Yes, they do, but the addendum does even a better job. Gaps in your education, medical condition that may be relevant to your studies, like you had to take time away and you weren't able to study effectively. So this kind of helps you along that process. Personal issues, any legal issues, this is kind of where that pops up, DUI, some kind of offense, hopefully not a felony, but something that you can kind of explain in an addendum and then substantiate it with evidence. If needed. I remember putting it in there. I had said that my SATs were trash from undergrad, were horrible. I studied abroad as an international student. My SATs were horrible, but I had done well in the international baccalaureate, so I banked on that. I got into UC Santa Barbara, transferred to UCLA, graduated top my class, took the LSAT, bonded 3 times, and basically said, look, I have a history where I don't do well in standardized testing, but I do well in the academic environment. So please, don't think that my LSAT score is a good indicator of my ability to perform. I believe my academic credentials are a better indicator, as well as my life experiences, as well as my future goals. And I think that helped me kind of push me over the edge, to Anna's point, to get into a school like UC Berkeley. I provided you with some examples of kind of quickly, like I said there, studied in a foreign education system, performed poorly on the SATs, and therefore that kind of helps me, I studied in a foreign system, but I did well there. I screwed up in my SAT, but I did well in college. Screwing up the LSAT, I'm confident I can do well in law school. And just as a secret, I didn't do exceedingly well in law school. I was probably an average student, but I did a lot of awesome things, as I said, including getting not only on the law review, but getting on the board of the law review, starting a law journal, teaching classes in the undergrad, and paying off all my debt, which I talked about last time, and doing just some really awesome experiences while I was there. The structure, usually it's about 300-400 words. Excuse me for my acronym, but I thought that was the easiest way to kind of think through it. So let's reclaim that term for us. In this case, I is for introduction, so kind of explaining and providing a little bit and saying this addendum is to explain my GPA from undergrad. Very, very simple. It's like a 1-sentence intro. And then C is for context as to what happened. Remember, explanations, not excuses. And then finally, E, educational learning lesson, what you learned from it, how those lessons will help you exceed the expectations of the program itself. All right, guys? Cool. So that's a third component. Um, Let me quickly talk about that Y School essay because, and it's kind of coming up here, and I want to quickly mention it. Okay, guys, you see this, it says CLAP, community, location, academics, personal. This is the acronym, the mnemonic I use to think through how to write that Y School essay. The way I would write it though is ACLP, academics, community, location, personal. So let's quickly go through each one of those, right? Academics, that's where you're going to say, your school is fantastic because I want to pursue, law with a focus on intellectual property. Let's use that. And Berkeley, for example, has an outstanding one. So you tell them, I'm pursuing law to pursue intellectual property, to be able to provide more digital literacy and more protections for people with the advent of AI, on and on and on, right? So then you start with A, academics. Your school has an incredible program in intellectual property that has, existed for 30, 40 years. You guys are the harbingers of intellectual property, especially with professors 1, 2, and 3, and the concentration of this concentration and credential that I would be able to receive from it. Also, I'm very excited to be part of this clinic or whatever it is. So you talk about classes, concentrations, clinics, professors, research, anything that really pertains to the academic IQ perspective. Then you go into C, community. And that's really where you start talking about the journals, the student organizations, the diversity of the campus, the vibe of the campus, and stuff like that, right? And that maybe is more into the EQ, right? Then you talk about the location. So example, Berkeley's in the Bay Area, which is probably the best place to be to do a startup or to think about AI or to think about intellectual property and so on and so forth. So you talking about the fact that you're looking forward to getting experiences and access to that community and that location in the Bay Area in San Francisco. And then finally, you've got P, which is the personal aspect. And that one is really kind of where you're saying, I took courses at Berkeley. I visited the campus. I know this professor. I've already done research. I audited a class. Whatever it is, my brother went there. My father went there. Whatever it is, it's that connection to that school. Maybe it's your alma mater as well, right? So that's kind of where you put that je ne sais quoi, the X factor, the thing that separates you from someone else. Because everybody else can talk about classes, everybody else can talk about the location in the community, but nobody can talk about that personal element that's personal to you and why that school connects to you. The stronger that P is, right, the more the school knows that you are indispensable to them and they are indispensable to you, and it's a match made in heaven. All right, guys, that's how to tackle the Y School essay. You break it up into those parts. You start off with a very high level intro, then you talk about the academics, then you talk about the community, then you talk about the location, then you talk finally about the personal aspect, how all that comes together to really showcase why that school is ideal for you. Again, that is that if you get a Y School essay. I believe Berkeley has one. If you don't get that school Y School essay from the school, then that's where you put it in that penultimate paragraph E or section E, the penultimate section before the conclusion. All right, guys? Cool. Woo! Here are your don'ts. Good. Okay, so I just have them as don'ts. So here are your do nots. Let's keep those in mind. Do not use cliche topics. That's why you have to have that uniqueness test, right? That's personal to you. Do not duplicate material. You avoid that with the totality test. Do not have irrelevant content. You do that with the Vega test. Do not have an impersonal approach. You do that with the authenticity test, right? The emotional test. Do not have multiple themes, right? I guess in some way that could also be about totality, the totality test, but that don't have multiple themes in there. So it becomes distracting. You're like, I don't know, it was started with this and it has another theme, and I've lost kind of control of what the person is offering and what they want to bring, why they want to come to the school. Don't list your accomplishments. Anna talked about that, where she talked about your stuff in your resume and also point to the purpose in your personal statement. Like, you don't want to just kind of list and rattle off all those accomplishments from your resume. You want to have something more there. Don't waste words. You have very limited word count. So you've got to make sure every word fits into every sentence, which fits into every paragraph, which fits into the essay as a whole. Don't do it where it lacking an outline, go straight into the essay without actually having that story structuring process, right? So important. Don't pursue divisive topics that in the end of the day can really kind of harm you, especially in the environment we have today. I wouldn't kind of over-index on divisiveness. You want to, focus on something that brings people together. I think that's much more important than divisive topics. And don't try to get cheap laughs. Don't try to be a comedian. Don't throw out there like jokes thinking, oh, you know what, this will hit. It could really kind of end up falling flat, and you stand to lose a lot more from a bad joke than you can gain from a good joke. All right, or from a good kind of like a flippant approach to your essays. All right. So that's the story success process. How should you start? Ideate, start brainstorming, right? Free writing, we talked about that. That's the storyboarding process. Outline, now that you've taken all these ideas, start piecing it together, right? Into the paragraph headers using that concept of the ABC, right? So maybe just make it even easier for yourself. Put A, attention grabber, background, career, direction, educational program, finale, right? So when you put that there, you'll have those as headers and then start fleshing it out with the bullet points in each one, okay? Flesh it out with bullet points for each one. Then basically start formulating sentences out of each one of those bullet points and then formulating those sentences into a paragraph, underneath those headers. Then remove the headers, make sure everything is fitting and flowing beautifully. You're perfecting it. You're checking for syntax, you're checking for responsiveness to the essay question, checking for the uniqueness, you're going through all the tests, right? And what you can do is you can get a second opinion, right? So ask someone who's a mentor, who knows you very well, someone who's an admissions specialist like us, or someone who's been through the process, who can talk to you about that. This is what law schools look for, and someone who's a great writer, so that they can also provide you with that input and say, yeah, this is well written. No, you need to kind of rehash this, right? So, get that second, third opinion, but I wouldn't go more than 3 people, and I wouldn't cover any more than those 3 qualifications. Somebody who knows you well, somebody who knows the process, somebody who's a great writer that can ensure what you're saying is translating into a great application. I do want to mention this because I think it is coming up and becoming a much bigger issue. Use AI for, it basically says there is concerning fraud. And this is kind of like with the Common App, but it also pertains to law school as well. A lot of law schools are pushing down on this. Is that it's, if you are using AI to draft or edit, I think that's a big problem. And the schools will use things like GPT-0 to find it and say, this is more likely than not written by AI. What you could use AI for is ideating. Just have that conversation like O3, like ChatGPT O3. It has almost a dialogue. So you can start talking to it and saying, I have this idea. What do you think? I'll have this. Well, why don't you think about this way? Why don't you think about that way? And thinking through. It's kind of like having your own coach through the process. And then basically maybe just kind of providing you with a rough overview of what it would look like in terms of structure. But you've already kind of created that structure because you have the ABCD. So you can use that to kind of help ChatGPT think through how you'd outline it. All right. But do not use it for drafting any of the materials. Do not use it for editing any of the materials. I think that's extremely important to avoid that. All right. The results, this was a client that we worked with a long time ago. Fantastic client, and he didn't have the greatest LSAT at all, but we really put together an amazing application that really stood out. The crazy part, he said, and this is really where the catharsis comes in. So you can read that second part. The crazy part about that is I ended up doing disability law and will be consulting a national disability project. This statement became my narrative. Grateful to you for helping me tell it right. And the idea is that the essay, if it's done well, if it's cathartic, if it's from the heart, if it passes the tests, if it's truly authentic, will become the roadmap for what you're going to end up doing. In fact, not only did this happen to him, it happened to yours truly. What I wrote about in 2003, I ended up doing in 2013. Working for the US government, doing international development law between 2 nations, which I thought was very, very important in terms of what I wanted to do and the story I was telling 10 years before I actually manifested it. All right. Let me quickly tell you kind of who we are, and then I'll leave it for any kind of last minute questions and answers. A phenomenal team of experts, super diverse, very accomplished, and they have a lot of experience, not only as admissions experts, but people in the profession, which I think is extremely important because it allows you to have a better sense of connecting with someone that may be doing what you want to do. And so can think about it in that perspective. But that experience, I think, is extremely important, but not experience to the point that they're so far removed from the process that they don't know what's happening today, right? But they got all graduate top of their class, incredible law schools, people that I certainly look up to from that perspective. All right. Uh, we've had 17 years of experience doing this and gotten people into pretty much every conceivable law school out there that you can imagine. Okay. Um, so again, a lot of experience from that perspective, getting into people's schools and people into schools with fantastic financial aid, right? A lot of financial aid, which usually is very difficult to get, but we've been able to help accomplish that. All right. And finally, I just kind of want to leave you with this, which is if you do contact us, we will provide you with access to the guide. And if you contact us within 24 hours, we will give you that guide for 25% off. So definitely look out for that because I think that is a great, great starting point for you to kind of have as a 180-page guide of everything you possibly need on the law school front. And I record into a series of videos that will also help you think through it. All right. I don't think there's any questions. I think we've answered all of them. So without further ado, guys, we really look forward to helping you getting into a top law school. You're talking to someone who's been through it, myself, someone who suffered from a lot of disconnects and difficulties applying, especially in terms of the LSAT. I wasn't like the greatest candidate, but I was able to get into, at the time, it was the top 5, top 6 law school. And I was able to accomplish a lot from it. And we've helped a lot of people do the same. So we look forward to helping you get on the right track and into your top law school out there.